Good morning, students. It's Friday morning. Sorry I'm so late getting this video out. I hope things are going well. Um, Please call me. My phone number is 260-578-1007. If you have questions or problems, please call me so we can talk about it. Be safe out there. Make decisions that ensure your health and your safety. All right, chapter 7 is about internal control. And what internal control is processes and procedures that a company is set up to do four things. Number one, to safeguard the assets of the company, make sure that the company policies are followed, to ensure operational efficiency, that we do things in the most efficient way possible, and fourth, to ensure accurate accounting records. And from an accounting perspective, that's the thing that we're looking at, is to make sure that our accounting records are safeguarded and are accurate, and that the assets of the corporation or the company are safeguarded. And so to do that, a good internal control system consists of 5 different things. Number one, competent, reliable, and ethical people that are working for you. One of the ways that we do that is background checks. We do it by looking at hiring people the appropriate educational background and appropriate experience and skill levels. That we give those particular individuals assignments, and that those assignments are given to them to perform specific tasks. And along with those specific tasks, that those specific tasks that they're assigned to incorporate a separation of duties. That is that we separate the record keeping of an asset from the custody of that asset. For example, you go into a Walmart and you buy something at Walmart. The cashier then takes your money, rings up the purchase, gives you change back, but the cashier does not total out the cash register at the end of the day. Somebody else from management comes down, totals out the cash register at the end of the day, and verify that the total amount of cash that's been received per the cash that's in the cash register matches with what the total cash received that the cash register has. And there we see this idea of a separation of the assets and the custody of the assets from the record keeping of the assets. One of the problems we have with internal controls is internal controls come at a cost. And that cost increases as the internal controls get more strict. And so as we're evaluating internal controls, we have to evaluate those internal controls based. One things we have to evaluate them on is a cost-benefit ratio. what's this internal control going to cost me, and what's the benefit that I'm going to derive from having this internal control. One of the things that happened as a result of the Great Recession that happened about 7-8 years ago was that a new law was passed, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, abbreviated SOX. And one of the things that SOX requires is that management of corporations are in terms of their financial statements are required to certify that internal controls have been followed. So let's look at exercise 7-12. The following situation suggests a strength or weakness in internal control. Top managers delegate all internal control procedures to the accounting department. Well, as you read about in the chapter, internal controls really start from the top down. That management needs to be involved in those developing those internal control procedures. And again, because of Sarbanes-Oxley or SOX, management's required to certify that those internal control procedures have been adopted and are being followed. Accounting department staff orders merchandise and approves invoices for payment. This is a separation of duties problem. Ordering merchandise should be separated from approving the invoices for payment. One of the potential problems here is that I could order merchandise, have it shipped to my home, or get it as it comes into the store and put it in my car and abscond with it. And if there's no one if there's no separation of duties, then I can get away with that and pay for it and take the merchandise myself. Cash received over the counter is controlled by the sales clerk, who rings up the sale and places the cash in the register. The sales clerk matches the total recorded by the register to each day's cash sales. And I just got through talking about that. Again, this is separation of duties problem. Someone else needs to come down and match the cash that's been received with the cash that should have been received per the cash register. The employee who signs checks need not examine the payment packet because he has confidence in the amount. Again, this is the person that's going to sign these checks and pay these checks needs to look at those invoices and make sure that the amounts shown on the invoices are the proper amount, that in fact that the product that's being shown on the invoice has actually been received. So anyway, that takes care of 7-12. 7-13. While reviewing the records of Quality Pharmacy, you find the same employee orders merchandise and approves invoices for payment. That's the same separation of duties problem that we've talked about earlier. Can't order and pay and approve the invoices. Business is slow as Amazing Amusement Park. On Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights, to reduce expenses, the company decides not to use a ticket taker on these nights. You know, you'll recall that when you go into a theater, you go and you buy your ticket from a person in front, and then when you go back to go into the actual theater, someone else takes your ticket. And that's a pretty simple separation of duties. And the reason that happens is that without that procedure in place, some friends of mine could come along and I could just let them go. Or even worse, somebody pays me money. I don't give them a ticket, but gives me money to get into the theater. I put that money in my pocket. By having a separate ticket taker from the person that actually lets them into the theater, then ensures that that does not happen. The same trusted employee is served for 12 years. One of the problems we have is we have these trusted employees that we trust implicitly. And because we trust them implicitly, we don't get too concerned about separation of duties. We just let them do what they do. And that sometimes leads to problems. I did a fraud audit for a client who had an employee that was like family, worked there for 20 years. They weren't aware that anything was going on. Excuse me. Until she tried to commit suicide one night, in which she confessed that she had been stealing from the company. When we went in and saw total up the best numbers we could, it was over $150,000 had been stolen from a small tarp manufacturing company. Had like 5 employees, and she was able to steal $150,000 because she was this trusted employee who had been there for a long time, and she was like family, and she wouldn't steal from us. That's what they thought. It turned out to be not true. D is gets at this idea that we make regular cash deposits when our cash deposits are small, not when we have too much cash on hand, and it becomes a really easy target for someone, to either an employee or someone outside, to take the money from us. And E, grocery stores such as Convenience Market, Natural Foods, purchase most merchandise from a few suppliers. At another grocery store, the manager decides to reduce paperwork. He eliminates the requirement that the receiving department prepare a receiving report listing the items received. The way this usually works is, as merchandise comes in, you have someone that receives those and goes through and makes a list of everything that was received. They're not given an invoice that has everything received. They make a list of everything that was received. And then that goes to the accounts payable clerk, and the accounts payable clerk matches what's on the invoice versus what's shown on the receiving report. The reason that is that if something extra is by chance sent and it's not on the invoice, somebody might take that out, put it in their car. Also, there's an incentive to just check everything off on an invoice if I'm given the invoice, and not mess around with going through and making sure that everything's there. So having a receiving report then becomes an important element of internal control. Okay, 15. Gary's car purchases high-performance auto parts from a Nebraska vendor. The accountant for Gary's verifies receipt of the merchandise and then prepares and signs and mails a check to the vendor. Again, we have this same problem of separation of duties. Verifying the merchandise, and which is okay, and prepares the checks. But after that person has done that, should include a copy of the invoice with that, and that invoice and that completed check then should go to another person then to be signed, and all the items then on the invoice verified that they've been received. All right. I'm gonna stop this video right here. It's really important that you go ahead and read chapter 7. There's a lot of important concepts in chapter 7, and so if you would make sure that you read chapter 7. I'm gonna give you some help on 7-17 and 7-22. I'm going to do that in a second video. So if you will look for chapter 7, part 2, I'll give you some help on those two problems. I'll show you how to do those journal entries and how to do that reconciliation. So make sure you watch part 2. Thank you very much. Bye.